Hello everyone, I am Professor Martin and this is my video tutorial series over various concepts in the area of Introduction to Business. Now a lot of times people will come into an Introduction to Business course not quite sure what it's all about or if it's even for them. Hopefully this course will have something for everyone, from those who may have no business knowledge and they're just starting out to those who have been in the business world for quite a while. Throughout this course, or this video tutorial series, hopefully you'll develop an understanding of the foundations of business and then be able to take that foundation and apply it where you're at now or in the future, using what you already know and what you learn and taking the business aspects and being able to apply those in the real world. Now in this first series, or this first video, I'm going to be going over the different concepts that are involved with the U.S. business system. More specifically, the environment of the U.S. business system. So let's delve into that right now. Now, one of the first things that people will say is, well, what is business? And some people will have their own definition of what that is. But a business, in essence, especially in today's global world of the business environment, a business is just an organization that provides either a good or product or a service to individuals, or provides both, provides goods and services. And why do they do that? Very simple: to earn profit. And profits are the difference between a business's expenses and the revenues that it generates. Without generating positive profits, a business will cease to exist. Now there are lots of things that can affect those profits, both internally and externally. So let's talk a little bit about that now. So in the US, we are a capitalistic system. And to further go into this business and profits, I think there's three areas we should talk just a little bit about before we move forward. First one is consumer choice and demand. As I said, in the US, we have a capitalistic system where consumers have the freedom of choice. Now, because consumers have the freedom of choice, businesses must take into account the customer demand as the customers show this through their wants and their needs. So if a business wants to make profit, they need to take advantage of what the customer's demand is. If a customer demands that new vehicles have smart speakers integrated into them, then if a car manufacturer wants to profit on that, they need to realize that that's what the customers want. And if they provide smart speakers in their vehicles, consumers are going to want to buy their vehicles because they're fulfilling that demand. And as they are able to sell those products or those vehicles more than other manufacturers who haven't integrated smart speakers into their vehicles, then they are going to generate those profits and take away from the profits of other auto manufacturers who aren't meeting the demands of those customers. Now the next area I want to talk about is opportunity and enterprise. Opportunity is going to involve goods or services that consumers need or that they want, especially if no one else in the market is supplying them, or if existing businesses are doing so incompletely or inefficiently. So take advantage of that opportunity. The third area here is the benefits of business. Businesses produce most of the goods and services consumed, employ most of the working population, and create new innovations and provide opportunities for new businesses to serve as suppliers in the market. Businesses contribute to the quality of life and standard of living in our overall society. Therefore, businesses provide income, they provide taxes to support the local governments, and businesses support to charities and community leadership. They provide all of that. Now I want to talk a little bit about something I mentioned earlier called the external environment of business. Now the external environment consists of everything that's outside an organization's boundaries that might affect that organization. And as a business manager, you must understand that your whole environment to be able to understand how to operate and compete within that environment. Now, businesses can also influence their environments. There are 6 major dimensions of the external environment. And those are the first one is the domestic business environment. The domestic business environment refers to the environment in which a firm conducts its operations and derives its revenues. Now, this is going to include its customers, its suppliers, and its competitors. Now, this should seem like common sense to you. Obviously, those external factors of what your customers are doing is going to affect you. What your suppliers are doing is going to affect your operations. And obviously what your competitors are doing. If we go back to the smart speaker example, if I'm a automotive manufacturer and another automotive manufacturer has integrated smart speakers, whether it be Alexa devices, Google devices, whatever the case may be, into their vehicles, and their sales are going up and mine are declining, then my competitors are part of that external environment that are affecting my business environment. All right, the next one we'll talk about, you see to the left of domestic business environment, is global business environment. The global business environment refers to the international forces that affect a business. Various factors can include like international trade agreements, international economic conditions of an area, and even possibly the political unrest that could affect the global environment at both the general and immediate levels. International market opportunities, suppliers, cultures, currency values, even competitors in international markets can impact any business. It is a global business world, and all of these can affect that. If we look over here to the right of our business organization, we'll see the next one we'll talk about, and that is the technological environment. Now, the technological environment generally includes all the ways by which a firm creates value for their constituents. Technology includes human knowledge. It can include work methods that are being employed, the physical equipment being used, electronics and telecommunications, and various processing systems that are used to perform various business activities. If you look directly to the left now, you'll see the next one we'll talk about, and that's the political legal environment. And this reflects the relationship between businesses and the government. This is usually in the form of government regulation of the businesses, whatever regulations are being imposed or created or modified. Next, you'll see down the bottom right corner, we're going to talk about the sociocultural environment. And this includes the customs, morals, values, and demographic characteristics of a society in which the organization functions. And as a business manager, this is key to you to know that if you're working globally and if it's, let's say, a new venture, make sure that you're aware of the cultural values and customs in that demographical area prior to doing business. Lots of businesses have made many mistakes by creating tension or bad relationships by not observing the morals and values and customs of a society that they do business in. And you can search online and find lots of different examples of that. And the sixth dimension is at the very top here, and that is the economic environment. And this economic environment refers to the relevant conditions that exist in the economic system in which your company operates. Make sure that you're aware of your economic environment of where you're doing business. Now, I mentioned this term a couple times already, so I wanted to make sure I put this up here and define it clearly for you. And that's economic system. This is your nation's system for allocating all of its resources among its citizens, both individuals and within organizations. That's what an economic system is. Another term I mentioned earlier I wanted to make sure that I address, and that is called factors of production. And this ties in with what I just talked about with economic systems, because a basic difference between economic systems is the way in which a system manages its factors of production, the resources that a company or a country's businesses use to produce goods and services. And we focus on 5 different factors of production. The first one is labor. This is that human resource element in business. Labor includes both the physical and intellectual contributions that its individuals that are employed make while engaged in economic production. We also call this human resources. The next factor of production is capital. These are the financial resources needed to operate a business. We also just call this, sometimes people will just say this is the money, but capital is that financial resource we need to be able to operate our business. The next factor are entrepreneurs. An entrepreneur is just an individual who accepts all the risks and all the opportunities entailed in creating and operating a new business. The next one we're going to talk about are physical resources. Physical resources are those tangible things that organizations use to conduct their business and are physical resources and can handle raw materials, offices, production facilities, supplies, and even our computers that we use on a daily basis. So those are some of those physical resources we use in business. And lastly, information resources. Businesses rely on information resources such as looking at market forecasts, as well as the specialized knowledge of their people, as well as the economic data. So we use all this information to make informed decisions. Now, one way to think of these factors of production is to think of these as inputs. So the inputs that are used to produce our outputs are these factors of production. If we're going to produce left-handed screwdrivers, then all of those things that I just mentioned, those physical resources, those information resources, the capital, the labor, all of that are inputs. And through all of those resources we use, those factors of production, then we get the output of our left-handed screwdrivers. Now, as I mentioned earlier, different types of economic systems view these different factors of production differently. And there are 3 types of economic systems I want to talk about and how they use these factors of production. First one we'll talk about is the planned economy. Now, with the planned economies, these economic systems rely on partial or total government control of all or most of the factors of production and allocation decisions. And you can see we've got a couple examples of that here with communism and socialism. Now, with communism, all resources of production are owned and operated solely by the government. So there's no individual control. It's all controlled by the government system. Now, the next one we'll look at is the market economy. Now, with market economies, producers and consumers control production and allocation decisions through the business supply and demand of the customers. The political basis of a market economy is capitalism, which allows the private ownership of the factors of production and encourages entrepreneurship by offering profits as their incentives. The economic basis is the operation of demand and supply. Now, lastly, after we have talked about these first 2, we look at the third type. This third one is the mixed market economy. Now, this type of economy features characteristics of both what the first 2 I just talked about, planned and market economies. Lots of countries are moving from planned systems to mixed market systems through what's called privatization. This involves the transformation of government-controlled businesses into privately owned enterprises. In the partially planned system called socialism, the government owns and operates selected major industries. So many of our Western European countries allow free market operations in most economical areas, but keep government control of others. such as with healthcare. Now, for many years here in the U.S., we've wrestled with who should control healthcare for the elderly population or for the population who's not yet eligible for Medicare. So there's always been that fight of what type of economy should control that. So it's just an example of those types of economic systems. And just realize that an economic system is defined by how it allocates its factors of production. So make sure you know those three types of economic systems. Now, I've mentioned a few times a couple terms that you've probably heard throughout your lives, but let's just look at them a little bit more in depth, and that's demand and supply. Now, demand is that willingness or ability of buyers, whether they want to purchase a product, which, once again, as I defined as a product, could be a good, physical, tangible thing, or a service, something that is provided to you, such as lawn care. And supply is the willingness and ability of the businesses or the producers to offer a good or a service for sale. If I want, some type of, let's say, online grocery market service, but there's no businesses in the area that are supplying it, then the demand's there, but there's no one supplying it. So as a customer, I have a demand, yet there's no supply. So there's obviously a market for it if lots of people have the same demand. Therefore, demand and supply are the predominant forces that guide decisions about what to buy and what to sell. So there's a couple laws that we can take in here as we talk about demand and supply, and that's the law of demand. Now, the law of demand simply states that buyers will purchase more of a product as its prices drop. The law of supply states that the producers will offer more of a product as its prices increase. You can see where there can be some conflict there. So we'll keep producing or offering a product as long as its price increases. Well, as those prices increase, people's demands are going to be affected because they want to purchase more of a product as the price drops. Therefore, the law of demand. So hopefully you can see that there's a little bit of conflict there. And that's where businesses need to take into account things such as a demand curve or supply curve. Because a demand curve is going to show how products will be demanded at the different prices that the business offers them. And a supply curve shows how many products will be supplied at the various prices. Obviously, as a business owner, I'm not going to supply a bunch of goods if I'm going to be losing money. So you find that break point, that break-even point, and then to make a profit, you have to go above that. Another term that we'll talk about real quick is surplus. And sometimes that happens. And we'll talk about shortage as well. A surplus is the quantity supplied exceeds the quantity demanded. So if I have produced a bunch of product, but the demand has gone away, then I have a surplus of the product. And I'm sure it's easy to figure out what a shortage is. That's where the quantity demand exceeds the quantity supplied. This a prime example of this was in recent years, Nintendo released a retro system of their classic Nintendo Entertainment System. The demand was high, but the supply was very low, so there was a shortage of the product in the market. The demand was high. If they would have been looking at the demand curve, they would have saw that they needed to up their supply, and there was a shortage. And then, our consumer demand exceeded what Nintendo's quantity was that they supplied. Now we'll talk a little bit about private enterprise and competition in the market economy. And I've mentioned a little bit of this before, but we'll just go into it even more in depth here. Private property rights. We'll talk about that. If you remember, I talked about private enterprise. Individuals pursue their own interests with minimal government restriction in a private enterprise system. And this system is going to comprise of certain requirements. And one of those is private property rights. This is the ability of individuals to own its own resources. Other areas here are the freedom of choice. Freedom of choice is that ability to choose where to work and what to buy. I choose where I want to be employed, and I choose what products or services I want to buy. And the private enterprise system is that ownership of the resources used to create wealth, and all of those responsibilities is on the individual. Talk about profits. I mentioned this before. This is the ability to take all the risk to earn profit, which is beyond the amount of money that you've put in, those resources we talked about. Competition. This is that ability to compete for customers and even scarce resources. Now, competition is going to occur when two or more businesses vie for the same resources or the same customers or both. Now, competition, there are different degrees of this that can help or hurt businesses and consumers. Now here we will take a look at those degrees of competition. Like I said, there's 4 degrees of competition in a private enterprise system that we just talked about. The first one, take a look here at the chart, is a perfect competition. This is where many small firms exist in an industry. No single firm is powerful enough to influence the price. An example here, you see we talk about local farmers. There are lots of farmers, so there are a vast number of competitors. It's very easy to get into this industry. And you can see that the goods and services that are being offered are going to be identical. It's because the competition is there. And because there are so many people, not a single entity is going to be able to level control over the price of all the other ones. The next one, as we move to the right here, is a monopolistic competition. This is where many sellers of all sizes, but many buyers exist. So sellers focus on numerous differentiation strategies, such as their brand names or their brand designs and how they're advertising their brands. And you can look through this chart here and see that there are lots of competitors. It could be relatively easy to get into the industry, just as it was with perfect competition. And obviously they're going to be similar in how they what they offer or produce, but they do have some level of control over the price of, if, as an example, in the shoe industry, there are lots of competitors in this, but for many years Nike has been the largest and been able to affect some control over prices of other firms for them to be competitive. If we go to the right here, we'll see an oligopoly. This is where an industry has had only a few handful of sellers. Market entry is difficult because large capital investment is needed to enter the market. So sellers are going to tend to be very large. As with the steel industry, very few competitors in the steel industry. So it's because of the size, it's very difficult, and the cost, it's very difficult to enter into the steel industry. Even though there may be, a few, they're going to be similar in what they offer, or maybe they're, will offer other services, transportation or whatever the case may be, or different grades of the steel. Maybe their ability to transport to larger distances is a factor, such as being able to go globally. So there's definitely the ability to level control over the prices of individual firms because there are so many few, the competitors are so few. Now lastly, we look at monopoly. This is where an industry or market has only one producer, and that producer is going to enjoy complete control over the price. Utility companies are a prime example of this. They are a natural monopoly. Industries in which one company can most efficiently supply all the needed goods or services. So duplicating facilities would be wasteful to them. And since there's no directly competing goods or services, the competition doesn't exist because they control what's offered, and how much it's offered for. That's a monopoly. Now, another term that I want to introduce here with the monopoly in talking about degrees of competition is a natural monopoly. And I kind of already said this, but a natural monopoly is an industry in which one company can most efficiently supply all needed goods or services. That's just a term you might come across. Now, because economic forces are so volatile and can be directly affected by so many things, the performance of an economic system is going to vary over time. It's not going to stay static. Therefore, knowing how an economy is performing is useful for business owners and investors alike. So what we tend to do is look at various economic indicators, which are just statistics that show us whether an economic system is strengthening, whether that economic system is weakening, or if it's just remaining stagnant or stable. Some of the things that we're going to look at are going to be such things as the business cycle. This is just a pattern of our ups and downs in our economy. We're going to look at aggregate output too. This is that primary measure of growth in our business cycle. So this is going to take the total quantity of goods and services produced by an economic system during a given period. So we can look at that and be able to assess this as an economic indicator. And our standard of living, we're going to look at this too. This is that total quantity and quality of goods and services that consumers can purchase with their currency in their current economic system. These are all different factors or economic indicators. Now, a term that's important to define here is gross domestic product, or GDP. Now, this is the total value of all goods and services produced within a given period through domestic factors of production. Now, GDP is a measurement of aggregate output. If our gross domestic product is going up, aggregate output is going up. If aggregate output is going up, the nation is experiencing a period of economic growth. The gross national product, the GNP, refers to the total value of all goods and services provided by a national economy within a given period, regardless of where the factors of production are located. So we have our gross domestic product, GDP, and as a nation, we have our gross national product, GNP. Here I wanted to show you an example of what a term called purchasing power parity. And purchasing power parity is the principle that exchange rates are set so that prices of similar products in different countries are about the same. Now, here we're looking at, this is from a couple years ago, how much it would cost you to buy a Big Mac in different parts of the world. And this is all based on the exchange rate of the US dollar. You can see in the US for a Big Mac meal it's going to cost you $5. And that's, once again, that's US dollars. Where in Australia, because of the exchange rate, if you were exchanging your US dollars in that country, it would cost you $4.30. In China, only $2.79. But then if you look, there are, if you were in Norway, it's going to cost you more. It's going to cost you $5.51. So just based on the purchasing power parity, talks about how those exchange rates for similar products. So I just wanted to give you that example here. Now let's take a look at a major factor in the growth of an economic system, and that's productivity. This compares how much a system produces with the resources needed to produce it. It increases in our productivity yield, increase the standard of our living, the standard of living. So increases in productivity, yield increases in the standard of living of an area. A couple other terms that are related to productivity here are balance of trade and national debt. Now, balance of trade, a country's balance of trade is that economic value of all the products that it exports minus the economic value of what it imports. So a positive balance is going to result when the value of our country's exports is greater than what we're importing. So more money is flowing into the country than because of that exporting. Now, a negative balance results when the country imports more than it exports. We're spending a lot of money instead of making a lot of money. And this in turn obviously is going to affect national debt, which is the amount of money that is owed by the government to its creditors. So if we're importing a lot, then we are spending a lot to other governments. Economic stability. Let's talk about that. Now, economic stability results when the amount of money available in an economic system and the quantity of goods and services produced are growing at about the same rate. So it's very stable. Now, inflation occurs when the widespread price increases plague our economic system. The amount of money in the economic system exceeds the amount of the actual output. Now, unemployment can be a result of if the level of joblessness among people actively seeking work in a certain economic system is high. So if employment's high, our joblessness is obviously high. And in an environment like that, when unemployment's high, we have a surplus of available workers that are seeking employment. Now, when employment is low or unemployment is low, there's a shortage of labor available for businesses to hire because they're all employed. Now, unemployment is sometimes a symptom of a recession. This is when aggregate output declines. Or unemployment could be a symptom of a depression, which is a prolonged and deep recession. So if we were in an economic downturn, we could see where this affects us. So if people are losing their jobs at the same time, we're going to see that income and spending are going to decline as businesses begin to implement cost-saving measures, like reducing their workforce, or you might hear the term downsizing, and this is going to lead to more unemployment. And we saw this back here in the U.S. 2008 to 2010, when a great recession of unemployment was here, and we were seeing around over 10% unemployment. So remember, a recession is a period during which aggregate output, as measured by our real GDP, declines. A prolonged and deep recession, this is when we go into the term depression. Well, that was a lot of information talking about the U.S. business environment, but the concept of business is not a small topic. So hopefully you gained some information from this, and I thank you for following along in this video, and I hope you will continue to check out some of my other introduction to business videos as they come about. So thank you guys for following along, and have a great day, and welcome to the world of business.